Welcome to the HKS Energy Policy Seminar. I'm Joe Aldi, and I'll serve as the host for today's talk. Like as many of you know, we're running the seminar series this semester in hybrid format. Thanks to everybody joining us in person in this standing room only environment right now. We won't tell the fire marshal. Thanks to all of our friends and colleagues and alumni joining us online. I'm thrilled that we have with us today our colleague from the Salata Institute, Elaine Buckberg, for her talk, The Uncomfortable Truths of Public EV Charging. Elaine is a senior fellow at the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard. At Salata, she leads research and stakeholder engagement to drive better public EV charging outcomes. She also covers industrial policy, supply chains, and geoeconomics, and teaches an undergraduate seminar on EVs. Previously, she served as the chief economist for General Motors. In that position, she assessed the impact of global economic developments on the corporation and advised the C-suite on competitive and economic policy issues. In the public sector, Elaine served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination in the Office of Economic Policy at the Department of the Treasury. She earned her PhD in economics just down the road at MIT and majored in both economics and English, which is not the natural combination to double major with economics, in economics and English at Yale. Elaine, we look forward to your talk. Welcome.
Thanks, Joe. And thank you all for coming. Wow, big audience. So today I am going to talk about the uncomfortable truths of public EV charging because frankly, it's still a challenge situation. I'm not going to talk today more broadly about EV adoption. Many of you heard Chris Smith from Ford a few weeks ago. I'm happy to do that in Q&A, but we're going to focus on charging today. And so why charging? So first of all, and why charging at Salata? Well, Jim, a couple years ago, asked me to come here and work on charging in Salata because it's a gating issue for achieving widespread EV adoption and unlocking the climate benefits, right? We need to fix charging to sell EVs to take internal combustion engine cars off the road over time and avoid emissions. And this is a slide I've been using for like 5 years from when I was at GM. But GM did market research going back like a decade on EV adoption. And the consumers said, sure, no problem. Just don't take away anything I like about my car. I don't want to pay a lot more. I want lots of range because I'm used to that. I want charging to be easy, note. And I want lots of shapes and sizes. So bottom line, most of this is about, except for this, is about battery costs and battery density. So you can get more battery in a vehicle without looking like a science project at a cost that's not too different. And EVs are becoming more close substitutes for ICE, but we've still got to deal with this one, right? Going back 10 years, concerns about charging were top of mind. It hasn't really changed. So JD Power does research. They survey recent new vehicle buyers regularly. They've got a special survey that focuses on EVs. And this focuses on people who are just like, I didn't want to buy an EV. I didn't even consider it. 4 out of the top 5 reasons are about charging. Lack of charging station available, that's pretty clearly public charging. Limited driving distance per charge, that's kind of going back to range. And oh, this is like, I don't have other charging, so I'm worried about it. Purchase price, it's in there. It's number 3. I've been tracking this survey for a few years and it hasn't been number 1. And this was kindly presented by Brent Gruber from JD Power, who came to Harvard Climate Action Week. So it's a big deal in terms of people's purchasing decisions. And really, so we call our initiative the Salata Seamless Public EV Charging Initiative because people want it to be really easy. They don't want it to take a lot of thought. Now, the fact is, for most buyers, especially new vehicle buyers, and for most of their driving, it's easier because about 75% of new vehicle buyers, the ones who decide if there are vehicles in the ecosystem, they both own their own home and they have dedicated parking. So that's a pretty good proxy for you can install home charging. And the automakers try to make it easier. Ford actually says they'll get it done for you. GM had a partnership with Qmera to help you find a qualified contractor. But even those buyers don't want to buy a compromised vehicle. So they're still going to say, but wait, I have to be able to do a road trip. And it doesn't really seem to matter in the consumer research whether there are 4 other internal combustion engine vehicles in the household, or they never do a road trip. And by the way, the National Household Travel Survey basically says that fewer than 5% of American households do a road trip longer than 100 miles each way. The current generation of EVs in market, 230 plus miles of range, right? Many of them 300, even coming in at 450. But what if some weekend they needed to take both kids and drop them off in different places? One had a soccer match and one had, I don't know, a dance competition, and they were both long distance. That might be a problem. And then there's those for whom it's harder. So people who can't charge at home, or maybe can't also charge in their workplace. So they're really going to rely on public charging. And think about that's generally city dwellers and renters. And in fact, city dwellers in particular are more likely to rent. They're more likely to live in multifamily where it's hard to install their own charging. They're more likely to park on the street or not have dedicated parking. And this speaking, so I happen to be one of those people. By the way, my husband and I have 2 EVs. We work 100 miles apart, so we basically live apart during the week, and we have no no home charging. So I live this. But it becomes increasingly important as the market grows, because over time, cars mature into the the used market. In fact, most vehicles have 4 owners in their lifetime. And hang on a second. And then public charging will become more critical because more of the EV owners or prospective owners are likely to be in that category of can't install home charging easily. So the good news is it's getting better. And so last week, the New York Times actually carried a big article where they mapped the location of every fast charger. And they compared the ease of doing a road trip weirdly against 2015, when the only 2 EVs in market were basically high-end Teslas, not even the Model 3, and some Nissan Leafs. But here, the darker blue dots, those are 10-mile radius around a fast charger. And the lighter blue shows that you're within 50 miles of a charger. You can almost pick out the highways along this. You're saying, okay, it's not so bad. In most of the country, you could go 50, you could travel, with a charger every 50 miles. You just better be working. So better, not so good. Like, look over here. But it's not going fast enough. So JD Power, again, this is from Brent Ruber's presentation. This is fast chargers, pretty growth rate, July 24 to July 25, 46,000 to 61,000. Level 2 chargers in the upper line, but not nearly keeping up with the stock of EVs. Now, there are many reasons why they charge faster, the chargers are faster, the vehicles can take it in faster. Like, the needs are a little difficult, but you're still not really keeping up with the EV park or the number of registered EVs in the US. And charging problems have gotten a lot of bad press, right? So here's the Wall Street Journal, here's USA Today. USA Today may not be as widely read, but nonetheless, it tells you that publications at sort of both the paper of record and the popular paper and are both covering this. And people take this in, and that helps form their impression. So, like, reporting about the crappiness. And I will tell you some personal stories as well as showing you data really affect things. So just like a summary. So what are some of the things wrong with public charging today? So first of all, there's no one-stop app to find chargers, which means it can be hard to find out whether a charger is working and doing a road trip. We'll talk about that a fair amount more in some of our research. 2, charging stations, they're not monitored. They're often in the middle of a parking lot at like a mall or a Walmart or something. So 1, if I'm traveling alone, do I want to sit there alone at night? And 2, well, who's responsible? Who do you tell when it's broken? So they don't get fixed. And often, if someone installed it as a way to attract business, they may not have gotten a service contract. Reliability is bad. So that's why I'm talking about if it's broken, because they do tend to get broken. And it's often hard to tell reliably whether one's going to be available if you arrive. Level 2 charging is a substitute. That's for sort of when you're staying in one place for a time. You have to leave your car for hours. And fast chargers are harder to find than gas stations. Remember the fearful customer, like saying that there are some. We shouldn't have as many charging stations in time as there are gas stations, because after all these electrons can be delivered at home. You don't need quite the same ratio. But that creates some fear. And they're just hard to find. Like, there isn't good signage. Although I have to hand it to the New Jersey Turnpike. Now, how often does someone say that about the New Jersey Turnpike? But on the New Jersey Turnpike, there are big signs before the exits that says, like, universal EV chargers here. And actually, the head of Apple Green, the rest stop provider that is responsible for those, is a collaborator with us. And I've said, can you also put in how many chargers are available? Like 4 of 8 chargers available right now. He's thinking about it. Okay. So, because they're not monitored, this happens. So my husband had to go directly from the Hartford airport to come here. I was like, don't worry. I found you an Electrify America. It's got 8 chargers. You'll be fine. And then he's like, I'm waiting for a charger. I said, why are you waiting for a charger? He's like, I finally got in. I took a picture. This is our Bolt. That's the tractor trailer blocking half the slots. Can you imagine at a gas station that someone got blocked? This is called being iced. An internal combustion engine blocked the charger. It happens a lot, including at level 2 chargers. Like, it was the last parking space, so I just took it. Who cares about the EV? So public charging is really critical, in research that Jim and Cassie Cole, a PhD candidate in the econ department, Chris Cannell at MIT, and others did a couple years ago, said, what if you took all the money spent in IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law and charging rebates or on charging and on EV rebates, and you shifted about 15% of the dollars? They said actually you'd increase EV penetration at 2030 by 20 percentage points, because that value is so much more impactful, and double the CO2 abatement. And when we did modeling about what different federal policy scenarios under the Trump administration could do to the budget and the EV share, basically the price of 1 percentage point of EV share is just like vastly lower with the money spent on installing highway chargers versus EV tax credits. So keep this in mind. And so what happened to policy? Well, there were 2 major levers. In the bipartisan infrastructure law, or IIJA, there was $7.5 billion for chargers. $5 billion, the NEVI program designed to be along highways, has been reinstated, at least for those dollars that had been delegated to states based on their plans. After being frozen for months, it was opened up in August. There's another $2.5 billion that remains frozen. My conversations with a lot of different people lead me to believe to about 75% chance this will be freed up, but it's not been done yet. And then the Inflation Reduction Act had 2 tax credits for installing chargers. One for that you could install at home, would cover up to 30% of the price and up to $1,000. And another one for businesses that was up to 6% of the cost and $100,000 per site. Eliminated in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So we really need to think about other levers, because we're getting less help from policy going forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is how real-time data, just data transparency, could cure range anxiety. And the NEVI requirement program includes this requirement that every charger that it installs has to provide real-time data. Is it working right now? Is it available right now? And how much does it cost me to charge if I were to start right now? And so, by the way, to start my job, I actually kind of tested everything. So we drove 2 EVs from Detroit. And by the way, we had never public charged, so this was like, rookies on the road, but that's how you have to start, right? So this was a picture from my GM app. And my husband did most of the driving, as is typical, and I sat there going back and forth from apps because in the GM app, I often couldn't tell whether the thing was working and available. I knew that was a problem. And so then I'd look at plugshare.com and see if anyone had checked in or said anything about the charger recently. Then I'd see if that company had its own app so I could see what they said and try to triangulate and decide where we could stop. I'll tell you that we overnighted in Utica because we didn't make it the first time. And the second time, we were like, oh, well, those chargers in Utica did actually serve us well. So let's just go there. It's in their data. So, you know, four handles and two or three credit cards later, we're sitting at the level 2 charger at the hotel that we had found, eating a snack and getting some more range so we could drive to the fast charger, but come back in case we needed to. Now it's getting better. I did it in a newer car. I did Boston to DC, pretty well charged route this year, but it's still kind of nerve wracking because you just don't know if you can trust the data. So why is this one-stop real-time data charging? Imagine that you could go to Google Maps, you could go to Apple Maps, you could go to whatever's the killer new EV app, and you could get reliable information, right? That's what we're talking about, one-stop shopping for all the data on all the chargers. So, because what's your real fear is that you do a road trip and you run out, right? We stopped to get more charge, to go to a charger to see, in case we needed to come back. Your real fear is that you run out of charge and you need a tow. And it's harder to, there are some services that'll bring a charger to you, but it's not quite like getting a gas can. And by the way, right, I said I looked for chargers and my husband drove. Solo driver can't safely cross-reference while driving. And why else is it costly? Well, you've got the fear factor, you've got the estimated value of your time looking around for charging. Like your trip might take longer because you might have to go to one charger and then another charger. On top of it being slower and getting gas, which is already a point of hesitation. Automakers have more real-time data, but they're generally only free for a limited time. So Elson Bankoff, an undergrad at RA, checked on all the major automakers last year. Typically, it's about 3 years that you get it for free. Now that needing to buy Wi-Fi in your car or subscribe to the app, say $30 a month, bigger deal for the used vehicle buyer. And other studies show that drivers value their time at about $27 an hour getting gas. So basically, what's their willingness to like deviate from their route to get cheaper gas? Well, they won't. They don't go out of their way at all, is the bottom line. So they basically about at median wage is how they value their time. So right, that's a real important hesitation. So real-time data sharing. So here's an image from the Tesla website. So Tesla, if you plan a route, it sends you to Tesla chargers. Plans a route. But this is pretty nice, right? Here's my route. Here's where I'm going to charge. Notice no data on the pricing. But then we go to plugshare.com. That's what's free for anyone. And these have real-time data on plugshare.com, which has, again, well more data than Google Maps or Apple Maps. All of these, no real-time data. No two big holdouts. The supercharger network, which historically was only for their own, Tesla's own vehicles, but not the case. And Electrify America, which is the second biggest network, especially for highway travel, and the biggest open network. Two big holdouts. So we took 6 of the biggest highways across the US, and with the power of undergraduate research assistants, found all the chargers that are within 2 miles of a highway, or if it's in a metro area, about a half mile, because obviously driving 2 miles through Boston could take you a while. And so every one of those red dots is a charger where you can't get real-time data on PlugShare. Again, free app with the most availability. And the green ones are where you can. 1 in 3 have central real-time data. You notice some really red areas? Call these data deserts. So that one, 1,300 miles. Now, we exclude dealers because at a dealer, you just never know whether it's only open at certain hours or it's only for their customers. It's behind, the service area. But that would be really challenging to travel through. But okay, there aren't a lot of gas stations in the Western US. Okay, maybe you need to be really prepared. But what about that? Like, that's one of the things I crossed coming here. That's in 250 to 350 miles. It's really challenging. And so we've said, like, from an economic standpoint, as many of you have learned, economists talk about multiple expectational equilibria, or rather, often it's self-realizing expectations. But what could drive you in different directions? And so we've said, well, if real-time data became standard, it should drive uptime improvement. It would put sunlight on down chargers. You couldn't, if you're a charging provider, you can't just keep it in your app. Creates a competitive charging market, reduces uncertainty, and reduces those expected search times, which should lift EV adoption. And oh, by the way, there's something in it for the charging providers. They are making their data somewhat more open because they've already got it in their app, but it's going to expand their market. I'm going to show you how much. But if we don't, well, what happens? We risk EV adoption slowing or stalling, and there could be uncompetitive pricing outcomes that are bad for EV adoption. So imagine Uber and Lyft style pricing on chargers. Now hold that thought. So, right, we're trying to figure out how do we drive this. So we've come up with a proposal where states would create the same requirements as for the NEVI chargers in their state. So from a research perspective, we model the individual consumer's decision whether to buy an EV or ICE. Consumers are deciding based on the availability of chargers. Charging providers are deciding based on the expected future stock of EVs. We survey consumers about what they actually think about chargers to parameterize it, but basically the idea is real-time data would shine light on charger downtime. It would lead charging providers to achieve higher reliability. Drivers would trust the data, and that would erase their range anxiety. So we did this survey, and it's somewhat disturbing. We did it about a year ago. We surveyed both EV owners, those are the darker bars, and prospective buyers planning to buy a vehicle in the next 12 months, in the lighter bars. So first of all, if there's real-time data and it says it's available, well, not a lot of trust, about averaging 60%. And apparently the actual drivers are less optimistic than those who haven't bought yet. If it's occupied reasonably, they think there's less chance that it'll free up in a time they're able to wait, about 40%. If there's no real-time data, it's somewhere between, like, says it's free and says it's occupied, but just not a lot of confidence and reliability. So we also want to put pressure on that. So bottom line, we do a lot of modeling. Jim designed this model. And we estimate that the EV share of new vehicle sales off a baseline that includes the One Big Beautiful Bill Act currently is on track for maybe 40%. We can talk about this modeling if you really want, or we don't incorporate certain other policy changes yet. But we think that we could raise it by 6.4 percentage points just with data. No expensive federal investment or investments in chargers, no expensive tax credits, a really cheap option at a time where we've got pullback of federal incentives. That would raise the number of registered EVs in 2030 by about 15%, which means that over time, the reduction in emissions, this is non-cumulative, so this is each year, 2030 would be about 15 million metric tons, right? And every year you keep adding to that. Near zero taxpayer cost. And so why states, right? Could this just happen with the market? Well, Tesla and Electrify America, again, the two largest players aren't doing it. There are some new entrants that are well-funded, like BP Pulse, Iona, Walmart, they're doing it, but it's going to take time for them to get big enough to really put pressure on the others. Federal requirement would be really efficient. In fact, the federal government could take it all in and put it on one API and make it really easy for software developers, but this administration is not particularly interested in either anything they would call a mandate or in data provision. So what could states do? Well, this could be a reasonable thing for states because one, they're protecting their consumers from bad experiences. think you've got regulations about weights and measures and other things to protect consumers. You're avoiding accidents when people try to cross-reference apps while driving. You're promoting EV deployment. That is interesting to two sets of states. One, those who are climate motivated, and two, those who have a lot of EV production or battery production in their states. And those do not overlap a lot. So you're hitting a lot of states. And encouraging EV travel and tourism through their state. Even if you pass through and charge, guess what? That might be where you have lunch. So we've actually developed model legislation jointly with Ari Pascoe, Carrie Jenks, and Eliza Martin at the law school. And that would have common standards that would be aligned with the NEVI chargers, but they'd also be common across states, which would reduce resistance and challenge for charging providers. Again, from a state perspective, this could be justified because it yields benefits at a very low cost. The ideal would be you do this for all fast chargers and level 2 chargers in the state. And realistically, in regulatory policy, you could say if it's older than some age or something, it was exempt. Second best would be all new chargers that are level 2 or public, because then the investors would know at the time of their investment that that this rules would apply. And actually, Massachusetts has been a leader in last year's climate law. It included these requirements, although somewhat more narrowly. It applied it to new chargers that are funded either by any level of government or ratepayers, or think your utility bills. California Electricity Commission has a similar rule with a similar restrictions going through California's very slow regulatory process. But got through comment well. And Maryland actually was going to go all the way and then created a committee to study it. But here's what you could do. The green states are ZEV and clean car states, ones that followed either fully or just sort of the penultimate generation California's stricter requirements for EVs. And the yellow states are what I call battery belt states. They are getting I believe it's at least $10 billion or 5,000 jobs. I might not have those numbers quite right, but they're getting a lot of investment in job creation. And they would want to see those plants completed, running on multiple shifts, producing tax dollars. This could enable a lot of travel through the country, but also at a certain point, the charging providers are going to say, well, what do I want to give someone a good experience when they're traveling through, here's New Hampshire. What am I going to not do it on my chargers in New Hampshire, but I'm going to do it for all the other ones in the region? At a certain point, it's probably just easier to program your software and offer a consistent experience to drivers so you can achieve tipping points. Then let's talk about pricing. So how much does it cost to start charging? Familiar picture? In fact, often, depending on the local zoning, it's up there. Gas prices are just higher in California across the board at all points in time. But right at a gas station, you expect to be able to basically see the price before you decide whether you want to pull it. Here's some current generation chargers. The Tesla ones, you can see the front and the back. I don't see a screen, do you? Alpitronic, these are great chargers. They're 400 kilowatts. I really like them. Little screen. Maybe you could find it in the app while you're driving, but it's really hard to see the price, and you often don't even see it when you're paying, based on my experience. Now, good news is home charging is cheaper than gas for 100 miles, considering typical vehicle mileage, same for doing 100 miles, about half the price. New England, not so much. We have the most expensive electricity rates in the country. That's a different topic. You can ask Joe about that. But highway charging is 2 to 5 times as expensive as home charging. Now, wait a minute. Gas is more expensive on the highway, but it's not 2x, much less 5x. But this highway fast charging, based on our sample, the same highways that you saw before, vastly more expensive. Now, right, you could have filled up on your home charger first, but it's much more expensive. So you'd really probably want to know how expensive it is, right? Especially if you're uh, a lower income household or a cost cash constrained graduate student. Um, and it's also more expensive than gasoline for the same mileage. So it's just, charging goes from being generally when you talk about EV adoption, the cost of ownership is an advantage that you have less service requirements. You don't need oil changes, for example. You can often go a few years before you need to have your tires rotated for the first time. And home charging is less expensive, but fast charging is more expensive. So wait a second. And this we've done by scraping data from PlugShare, by the way, and like sort of creating facts that are not otherwise visible to users. Like there are long text strings of data, and through the power of undergraduate RAs, in this case, Angelina Shu and Stella Wang, we use ChatGPT to disentangle these long text strings into like every hour of the week and what it costs and whether or not there are add-on chargers. This is just the price per kilowatt. However, it doesn't seem like we have competitive markets yet. So here we've color coded the price of charging from 20 cents a kilowatt up to about whatever is the max. And you can see, one, there's not a lot of green. And here, like here's California, we've really focused in on I-5. California is the most mature market in the country. About 26% of new vehicle sales are EVs in California versus 8-9% nationally. But you can see like there's a yellow dot next to a red dot. There's a bunch of like mixed. So it's not like it's going to be predictable when you're driving down the highway. You're going to care a lot about where you stop, and they're not necessarily that close together. You can see the same kind of thing nationally where the colors are all mixed. And so that may just be because it's not a very mature market. Also, when I talk to charging providers, I get the sense that they don't really think in those terms when they are installing charging. They may be more oriented, well, we just provide a consistent price. And pricing's becoming more complex. So imagine that you went to the gas station and that big sign said, well, at lunchtime, here's the price. And here's the price for rush hour and lunchtime. And if you come at other hours, we give you a discount. So this is EVgo. EVgo is probably the third largest provider of charging in the country. There's 10 stations. They all have multiple different prices a day, more than 2 generally. Generally at least 3. The price drops down at around midnight. It goes up somewhere between 5 in the morning and maybe 8 in the morning. It goes up higher and it comes down. And look at the range of some of these. So let's look at the orange line. I'm sorry, there's like a lot of different similar colors here. So I'm going to take this red line. It starts at about 51 cents. And it ends up going up to about 69 cents. That's a really big percentage change over the day. And maybe part of their motivation is to attract Uber drivers and price sensitive people during the low pricing hours. But you'd really want to know the pricing when you're planning to head to it. Remember I said, what if it was like Uber and Lyft? Well, at least three different charging providers we found in data from Perrin actually have experimented in recent months or are still experimenting with dynamic pricing. So here's 3 weeks in August. This is the prior one, thanks to Jean-Francois Fournel, one of our colleagues, postdoc. And you can see that the same 3 different weeks in August, different pricing happening here, like not a consistent pattern. And these price changes are pretty big. So look, this starts at 30 cents, but it goes to about 54 cents. Really big percentage change. Needless to say, consumers don't exactly like it. So on Reddit, this guy says, I drove 7 miles to the next charger because it was 11 cents cheaper per kilowatt. And then when I got there, the price rose by 20 cents because everyone else rerouted there too. One guy says, pro tip, navigate to the most expensive one and watch the prices drop as everyone runs away. And this guy says, can you imagine if gas stations had dynamic pricing? So this is an area of ongoing research, but it's clearly a little bit Wild West for the user, or may feel that way. And that's why we think pricing transparency is really important, and the real-time data requirements would achieve that as well. So I said cities were also an issue. So Department of Energy estimated in 2030 where the EVs are going to be and how much charging will happen on different kinds of chargers. So rural areas, they think will have about 20% of EVs, 14% of charging will be on public chargers. Suburban areas, about 60%, 28%. Cities, 20% of the EVs, 55% on public charging. So we've tried to figure out what's the experience. So once again, we've scraped data from PlugShare for all the chargers in the 25 highest population cities. And we've been looking at some of the characteristics. And this is ongoing work. These are all preliminary results. But first of all, we looked at the mix of level 2 and fast chargers. So interestingly, Oklahoma City actually has the most fast chargers, about 50%, because it's the home of Francis Energy, which is a big fast charging provider that's starting to expand. But most of them, the average is about 22% fast charging. Boston has about 5%. On level 2 chargers, you're going to care more about how far you have to go because you need to go drop off your car and pick it up later, basically. And so we figured, like, what's that like? So I know personally that, I went to a charge point charger this weekend. My routine is I wait till the weekend, drive my dog to the charger, I walk him back. It's like, should be 15 minutes, but he stops a lot. So it's 20. And then I've got to reverse this a few hours later, and I've got to make sure I'm arranging my schedule so I can pick it up at a suitable time. So we took in each of these cities, we took every census block group. We found the centroid of the block group. Then we found the 4 closest chargers by straight line distance. And then we've used Google Maps to figure out how long does it take you to walk to the charger and how long would it take you to drive to each of those chargers. We've chosen the shortest route by walking distance. Okay, so good news, sort of. There are 5 cities, including Boston, and this is Boston proper, where it takes less than 20 minutes to do that round trip. Remember, you need to do it twice. Another 4 where it takes less than 30 minutes. So that means we're talking about 25 cities, and 16 of them, it's going to take you more than a half an hour. It's just sort of not a viable option. Maybe you could get on public transportation, but as we get down to these cities, right, there's not a lot of public transportation probably in Columbus or Jacksonville. Probably not great transit. So it's just still like very difficult to adopt in a city. The other thing we looked at is to what extent is there real-time data? Because, right, I don't necessarily want to drive, especially in traffic, from charger to charger. I'd like to know whether it's working en route to the right one, or decide I don't actually want to do it right now because the second one's too far for me to want to walk back from. So it's mixed. So Boston's winner, 84%. Average about 60%. Okay, but that means 40% you don't know. New York, 27%. So just still a lot to do, a long way to go for cities. We're hoping out of this research to also get to some optimal location analysis that can advise on this. And this work was actually done by last spring's team, and Andreas Lordos and Ben Heilbronn, 2 RAs, had particularly large contributions to this. But I don't want to leave you without optimism because it is changing. So let's talk about some of those changes. So first of all, like the charging stations are starting to change. So Electrify America has some sort of premier stations, 25 plus chargers. Inside, you're not exposed to the elements, lighted, possibly attended, Wi-Fi, bathrooms, snacks. This is from Iona. Iona is a joint venture created by all the large automakers with the exception of Tesla and Ford. And so they've got a few different kinds of charging stations, including their rechargeries, but you can see this one would be safe and well lit. Remember, I said I didn't want to be there alone at night. Have a canopy, if not be indoors, restrooms, so on. So it's changing. Think about Walmart. Walmart has historically hosted the Electrify America chargers. Now they've got their own ones. If it's their own, you feel like you could walk in and tell the customer service agent it's not working, it'll get fixed next time. There's also the chargers and the EV charging technologies being developed to make charging times much shorter. So right now, about the best of breed vehicles, first of all, there are by next year, there will be at least 5 EVs that I'm aware of in market with over 400 miles of range. But they're saying, okay, well, we can, and some of those can charge from like 20 to 80 in 15, 20 minutes. So that's the top of the line right now. BYD is saying you're going to be able to, BYD, big Chinese automaker, originally a battery maker. They've developed and actually rolled out some new models and some chargers where it's a 1,000 kilowatt charger to dispense 1,000 kilowatts per hour. Fastest ones in this country, there's a couple 450s, but basically in general, you're seeing very little over 350. The vehicles can't take it in that fast, but they've developed some. So, right, that's the future. That's becoming a more perfect substitute. And then there actually are technologies being developed that would charge as you go, so you'd never need to stop. This is maybe particularly important for trucking, but I believe it's Electrion is an Israeli company, and actually Detroit actually has a mile of road in the city that has this technology embedded, so vehicles go up and charge while they're driving. And then if you know me, you know that I am an EV optimist, and I really feel that this is the technology of the future, that even with pullbacks in the US, Europe and China are moving much more rapidly in that direction, much higher share, we continue to get it. That will drive us towards EV as the future of vehicles. And for the consumer, I just don't feel like I should say enough that they're really fun to drive. It is a better driving experience. It is better acceleration, which is important for safety. It is smoother. It is quieter. Very few people go back. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Elaine. Let me start with a question about getting the power to the stations. This has been one of the questions that people have raised about the challenge, especially if we're trying to build out a network, say, along the interstate highway system, is how we make sure we have enough juice on the wires that can meet some of these potentially large charging stations. And there's been a bit of a challenge sometimes in coordinating local regulation of power markets with the needs of these charging stations. So you didn't have really get into it too much here. I was wondering if you could get into that to provide us a sense of how we're addressing some of those challenges, because I think that was part of the initial challenge with the NEVI rollout, and what we think we're going to need from the states and the state regulators to help make this happen.
That's still a really challenging area. I would say a few things. One, utilities aren't used to moving really fast. To a fast charging station with 4 or more chargers, and increasingly the stations are larger because there are more EVs, and because one way to address reliability is just having lots of chargers. So, and you go to the gas station, you never worry that you won't get gas, but there's often one pump out of service, right? Just not a problem because there are others, right? So you need bigger and bigger stations. So I think that's still a challenge. I think there's some things being worked on that are important. So there's the Transportation Electrification Alliance is actually really focused on public utility regulation around these issues and addressing things like demand charges. Let me come back to that in a second. But going back to like the availability of power, EPRI has just put out a tool that helps charging providers or site owners look at where there are large amounts of power and where there isn't. So, like, will this be an easy site, or is this a site that could take longer because the power needs to be brought there? Um, and that could introduce delays or substantial costs being added to the bill of the charging provider. Demand charges are also really important. So you on your home bill, either pay a flat rate at all times, or especially for people who may not be local, you may have sort of higher rates at certain foreseeable times of day. Commercial electricity rates are often a function not just of how many kilowatts you use, but what was the highest number of kilowatts you used at any unit in time over the month. If you were a big user, your charge per kilowatt is more expensive. Now, think about if you're thinking about a plant or something, okay, they're probably consistent. But think about a charger on one of those Western highways. It's not used very often, but when it is, it's a 350. And there are 4 chargers. So it could be using 1,400 kilowatts. If they were all once in the month in use at the same time, that could throw up the rate enormously and make it quite unpredictable. And so the kinds of things that Transportation Electrification Alliances is trying to like explain why you want a demand charge holiday for this, like draft the regulations that could be put in place.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me open it up for questions from the audience.
I'm trying to decide what to make as like as soon as you finish, lots of seats empty.
Elaine, thanks. Mike Toffel, HBS. I wonder if you can comment on what you view the market failure being on the absence of real-time data that would merit the need for state-level regulation. If it's viewed as a benefit for consumers, you'd think that suppliers might compete on this.
So I hear a number of different explanations for why charging providers don't want to do it, and often it's different forms of. I view data as my data as an asset, and I want to retain that data, and I don't want to share it as consumers. These include I told my investors that I would sell my data, so I don't want to give it away for free. I do actually sell it to the automakers, so I don't want to give it away for free. Um, I don't want people to know where my successful sites are, so they locate across the street, or I don't want them to know where my unsuccessful sites are, perhaps because they're an investor. Now, I know a former graduate student who was scraping a lot of the CPO's apps every 10 minutes for one state, so really anyone determined can answer this. I want to keep everyone in my app and going to especially if you have a big network, well, maybe everyone will just stay in the Electrify America app and just go to Electrify stations or become a member. You'll get consumer loyalty. So there are a bunch of reasons like that. I think that that is why it is an area for like the private value of that asset to the charging providers is not shared with the users. And we have attempted to emphasize the greater market growth that could come to the charging providers, and we have been in touch with a number of charging providers. And obviously, our research on this is public. But we haven't. So when there is a mismatch between private and public benefits, that can be a good role for policy.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really interesting. Hollis Robbins, MPP, a long time ago. I'm here as a Hutchins Fellow this year. Can I ask about, again, in terms of pressure points in policy, rental cars, ride share? I'm here for a year. I don't have a car. I've been trying to do Zipcar and Turo and whatever, and trying to do an EV while I'm here because I have an EV back in Salt Lake City. Whole bunch of other anecdotes about that. But it seems to me that the number of ride share, the whole corporation, the whole endeavor would want this to be easier. Have they been helpful in setting policy, working across state lines. Clearly, they're getting new policies about insurance and all sorts of things. Are they an asset that can help drive policy?
The rideshare companies are very interested in this. They, one, they like to be able to say publicly that they are reducing emissions. Two, the drivers really like driving EVs, right? If you're driving all day, you appreciate the quiet and the smoothness and the lower cost. Rideshare drivers are often also not well set up to install home charging. And so it's interesting. The city of LA, for example, is very conscious in rolling out charging of targeting, for example, where rideshare drivers live. So they're interested. The rental idea sounded really great, including to me when I was at GM. And it would be, in many cases, rental cars introduce someone to a product. So there are a lot of reasons why automakers don't love the rental market, but they like to deliver a lot of family-friendly EVs around Disney and have them use there to introduce people to that Chevy Traverse with the third row. I think that, so it sounded like a great idea, but I think that in many instances, the charging was a bit of a bottleneck. The rental companies want to turn over the cars really quickly. So if you don't return it with an adequate charge, then someone's getting one with almost no charge. Hertz, I have rented EVs from Hertz. They send you a ton of information, but it still can be a rough learning things. Hertz has planned for, at least at some airports, to have like huge, really fast charging stations. So they could be quickly turning them over and charging, but it's obviously not worked that well because Hertz pulled back, and we probably all met someone with a bad story about it. Jim, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Elaine. Just on Mike's comment, there are a couple of externalities in this area. One of them is that if I build a charger, then I don't, that actually stimulates additional market demand, but I don't get fully compensated for that additional market demand. So that's one of the externalities that leads to underbuilding of chargers. If, and the same logic goes for sharing data. So if I share data, doing so has this externality that it builds market demand, but that benefits my competitors. And so I'm not fully compensated by that externality. So you can find yourself in this, if you think about it as an information revelation game, we're kind of in the I keep mine, you keep yours, and it's in both of our interests to coordinate, but it's not in either of our interests to deviate from our cell. So I think that's sort of the hope here. I wonder if you could say a little more. I keep getting confused about the NEVI situation, and it's been going back and forth and back and forth. Are the full NEVI funds going to be released, or is this most recent round just about the ones that had been obligated or obligated but then simply withheld?
So what has been announced, I would say, appears to be only about what was obligated and then withheld. However, I think that the signals are, and the reasons why they did that are pretty positive. So in August, the sort of press release on the DOT website has Duffy saying, "We think this is a terrible program." This is almost an exact quote. "This is a terrible program, but it is the will of Congress that we do this, so we will do it." Now, why did they do it? I would say there were twofold pressures. One, there had been a district court decision that 17 states had sued to free these up. And I think for 14 of them, they said, you must free up these funds. And for the other ones, they said the reasoning wasn't well enough expressed. Secondly, Politico had been reporting that I think it was a House committee, was planning to put in the appropriations bill that DOT will have 30 days to release new guidance, and then a total of 90 days to put that guidance in place. So they were going to be pushed to continue doing it. That, I think, would signal that it is likely to continue. It also was untouched in the, this happened after it was untouched in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So I would be quite optimistic that the rest of the $5 billion for future tranches would move forward, but nothing is done.
Hi, I'm Moritz, MPP student here at the Kennedy School. I'm actually from Berlin, and my question would be in terms of non-price policy angles. Is there any research, or have you come across other levers that can increase the EV adoption and also kind of the spread of chargers? For example, in Europe and many countries, it's common that on public lands, there's a requirement or mandate to also build a charger, or parking, for example, is free if you use a EV charger in a part of the city. And the second question would be, in some parts, you showed this map, in some parts of the countries, it might just not be profitable to put a charger. But given that many people have this anxiety around charging infrastructure, might it be the job of a state to actually fund some non-profitable charging stations just to get the basically rate up, even though it might not be profitable for someone to operate it?
Right. So I'm just going to maybe go in reverse here. So, right, charging is a network. The network needs to be complete and not have giant holes in it for people to be willing to adopt. Although, few people would do road trips that big, and there'd be more reliance on home charging in these lower density places. But that's where lower density places are where people travel longer distances. So that, I think, was a lot of the reasoning behind the federal policy, because states individually can't build that network. In terms of other levers, there are a lot of other levers like zoning codes that would require you to have new buildings or majorly rehabilitated buildings have if not EV chargers, like have the electrical power EV ready, so you could install level 2 chargers. And we put out 2 different reports on urban charging, one of which looks at different strategies cities have taken, and another one that we met with a bunch of relatively advanced cities, including Oslo, and the rest were American, and talked about sort of how do you get it done? Like, how do you build a team? How do you do policy? How do you do funding? So some of this is smart practices. So Portland, Oregon has had a policy where you can install curbside chargers, and they've kind of set a standard program, like you come and you meet all these requirements in this list, and we'll give you access to curbside for installing chargers. We put out guidance last week. A couple other things. We put out guidance working with industry on 2 weeks ago. Actually, we put out guidance for states about how to write contracts or structure contracts for fast charging in ways that should help get faster uptake and like deliver faster. We pointed to an example in California where there's sort of standing offers that are always available rather than lots of deadlines. And in Colorado, where one of the ways they help attract chargers in rural and low population areas is by paying more for those chargers, because the profitability won't be as good. We did another one about plug-in charge. Plug-in charge is what you sound like. It sounds like you stick the thing in, you stick the charger into your car, you make sure it starts charging and it walks away. No fussing with payment. Payment is a relatively large source of fails and can also take time. And some charging providers require you to have their app and stuff. So this would reduce failures and make it, easier than going to the gas station. So there are some examples. I think we had a couple in the back, actually. Yeah.
I had 2 questions. One small one. What is the confidence interval around the 6.4% jump we are talking about, like plus minus?
It's in the paper, but I don't remember. But
Yeah.
we've got an NBR working paper
Yeah.
that says the pre One Big Beautiful Bill Act,
Yeah.
and that work is in a paper released by Brookings and AEI, and both they're available via our website.
Thank you. The second is like if
And it's that shows the confidence intervals, I believe.
Thank you. The second one is about if there's information asymmetry, what is stopping a player like a market, any crowdsourced solution from like just having users community source data to reduce
Well,
this?
PlugShare does that, but people aren't reporting in that much. I never actually report in when I have a frustrating experience or a good one. There are some newer apps that seem to have more information, but then, you know, you hear that it's not actually being updated frequently. So it hasn't arisen yet. So you could look at Chargeway or a Better Route Planner. They claim to have more data. You know, when we try to see, are these getting acceptance, and we look at the App Store and the Android store, they don't have a lot of reviews. So maybe haven't taken off yet. Maybe they're just not the killer product yet. Google has, you know, and Apple and large telemetry providers could actually, you know, well, are people stopping at this charger for long, or do they come and like stay for a minute and leave? Okay, that may not work. So there are some AI-based possibilities. Some of these apps that require you to sort of subscribe, and they're claiming to sort of be buying more data or getting agreements. So it's still an evolving area.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I heard because of the unreliability of public chargers, I heard about this idea that a company is trying to have batteries, like rent batteries, and then kind of like a triple A for EVs. And I wonder if there are other models out there to like charge.
I hear there are some services where you could, you know, rather than getting someone to drive you to someone to take you to a gas station where you could buy a gallon of gas or a few gallons of gas, that a charging truck will come to you. I think it's probably rare. So, you know, that might work along I-95. It might not work along I-90, exactly where the chargers are farthest apart. So then you're probably looking at the expensive tow. I think we maybe need to get into a market where there are more EVs as a share of total vehicles before we're going to see a lot of that. And we had a question up here, and you kindly just dared just sit in the front. So let's get maybe.
Thank you. I was wondering, as EV itself ages, the EV charging infrastructure also ages. At the same time, there's new technology. So like fast charger is not a thing. Maybe while they adopted 5 years ago, and now charging is getting more faster. What happens when these charging infrastructure becomes old and obsolete? Do we continually need to replace them, or do we keep age-old infrastructure and then build upon them? And kind of, what do you think?
So first of all, like the reliability of older infrastructure is worse, and that's in Charger Help's new reliability report. And it also seems that older infrastructure, the earlier infrastructure may be aging faster, and it was early infrastructure. So I think that's up to the charging providers. Like, I imagine that if you have limited real estate, there are two reasons why I think they'll try to update. A healthy company would try to update the infrastructure. So one, you want it to work. Two, you have limited real estate and you're selling by the electron or by the kilowatt. And so I think utilization used to be the measure, like how often, how many minutes per month is this in use? But now it's throughput. So how many electrons did I sell, you know, at this charger per month? Because a faster charger can turn people in and out faster. And as vehicles are able to take in faster and faster charge rates, that's become more important. So I think, you know, you'll mostly see upgrading, but it's going to depend who owns the charger, among other things.
Hi, I'm David, National Security Fellow, not an EV car driver yet, but I do have a golf cart, and my 15-mile range I do start to worry about when it's raining and everything else. So you imagine at gas stations, you know, there's no there's no reservations, right? You go to Costco and Sam's and you wait because it's worth the time to wait. Are reservations a thing in the EV supercharging world? Can they become a thing? Is that?
I think it's more like, will they be a thing? Like, that's a common question. I've never seen a reservation service, but it gets a fair amount of discussion. Also, one of my favorite EV enthusiasts is a Georgia Public Service Commissioner by the name of Tim Eccles, who is a registered elected Republican advocate for EVs, and he says, yeah, all the Republicans who don't like EVs, well, they still want the electric golf cart.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry, excuse me. I wanted to ask you about the security of these EV chargers from a point of grid security. So what if we have more information published about them and then someone simulates an attack node on it by, for example, draining a lot of electricity from them? Has there been any studies of this?
Not that I'm aware of, but I offer Joe the opportunity to.
Thank you.
Thank you. China has mobilized large-scale green credit and bond to finance support EV charging networks, especially through green infrastructure funds. So, do you think is it possible in the USA for use similar financial instruments to attract long-term private investment in public charging?
So, I mean, the big companies are public companies. I'm sorry, publicly traded companies, not publicly owned companies, right? Tesla, Electrify America. Electrify America is owned by Volkswagen. Electrify America was created out of the Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement. EVgo is a publicly traded company. ChargePoint is a publicly traded company. So, but I think that our regulatory structure is very different. China has done a brilliant job of rolling out infrastructure way faster. You have a newer grid and a different ability to perhaps do stuff top down. And it definitely merits thinking and looking at, but I think they're very different systems, and thinking about how our electricity system is managed and regulated is, I think, perhaps, Joe, an area for some joint work.
Let me comment. Do we have one more question? We have one more question, then I'm going to make a quick comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you for this very interesting seminar today. I have a quick question on swappable batteries. I know that's been something that was explored by Tesla in the early days and something that EVs in China is in a nascent stage of being rolled out. Do you anticipate that becoming more popular? I know there's technical constraints and other considerations.
Yeah, I'm not big on battery swapping, so I'd point to a few different things. So like NIO is the exemplar of it in China. It hasn't really been taken up by many others, and NIO is, makes beautiful vehicles, but is in some financial distress. If charging keeps getting faster, then why do we need battery swapping? It would be some sort of intermediate phase. Batteries are not very homogeneous. So just like automakers viewed their engines as a proprietary selling point, a lot of the automakers view their batteries as something proprietary. In order to battery swap, you'd need uniform batteries. There is a company, I can't remember the name, that was trying to do it in this country, and they did get some automakers interested, but I've not ever encountered any of their stations. There are also other issues. If you are buying a car but do not own the battery, there are regulatory issues about whether or not a car has been sold, and whether it meets all the requirements. There are sort of consumer trust issues around, I had a new car, I came with a battery, I went to the battery swapping station, I got a different battery. You need to give assurances that all batteries were above some quality. So I'm just not very optimistic about it because I think we're more likely to move to faster charging, that it's less of an issue. The other, and again, this matching thing, like imagine you have to go to you basically have to go to like the equivalent of a dealer. You'd have to go to a swapping station that had your kind of battery. So not only would the automakers have to really standardize their batteries across their vehicles, but you'd either need to go to the right swapping station, or you'd have to have swapping stations with many different batteries. And given our much lesser density, that means going out of your way more, although maybe in less traffic than in Chinese cities.
Thank you. I'll just remark the one time I've driven an EV, I rented it from Hertz. We were visiting my in-laws in Florida in St. Petersburg, and the kids were thrilled. They loved the car. My wife was like, "Why did we rent this EV? There's nowhere to charge in St. Petersburg." And I said, "It's much cheaper than an internal combustion engine vehicle for this week. And even if I return it with less than a full charge, the penalty I pay is actually less than the penalty would have been for the same amount of being under per gallon, given the penalties they would charge for not bringing the tank filled back. So like, we're going to do it." And then she's like, "But you shouldn't bring it back without a full charge." And we found out that one of my in-laws' neighbors had an EV. He was checking out, was chatting with me about it. I was like, "So where's the nearest charging station?" And this is St. Petersburg, Florida. This is 2 or 3 winters ago. So it's a pretty, it's spread out, but he's like, "It's about 9 miles." 9 miles was, he thought, the closest public charging station, and he owns an EV.
Did he let you charge in his garage?
He was not that generous. But when I said that to my wife, I was like, "So it's a 9-mile drive to the charging station." And she's like, "I think we're going to return the EV without a full charge." So it's one reason why Hertz is probably getting out of this. I read, I was being the economist and I was reading the incentives, and I was like, I don't have the incentives to actually bring it back charged. But they also weren't making it easy for us, including the fact that we actually didn't have an owner's manual. Like I said, I actually don't even know how I see this. I don't know how to open this. And I assume I would like stick something in, but I don't really know how that would work. And they didn't have the owner's manual for us, but they did have a hard copy printout of, I forget if it was Easy Go or Electrify America, but it was one of those where I could then read the URL and type that into my phone. So I could try to find where there might be a charging station near me. But I was like, this is not that easy way to bring you in. Like you talked about earlier, this may be one way to sort of teach people, these are fun, cool cars. Part of the too is like, there's some new things I got to figure out. And especially when you're on like holiday vacation, that's not when you want to be figuring this stuff out. So like, I think we all have these stories from renting. I mean, I talked about this with friends as well. When we've rented EVs, like none of us have, boy, it was an uneventful but exciting trip driving the EV. It's always like, oh, I had like one thing that sounds like my blood pressure went high for a little bit during this time of renting the car. But the kids loved it. And I keep hearing from them, we need to buy an EV. I keep telling them eventually, because we're a one-car family for a reason. But that's a different story for a different time.
Can we bring this up? It's a terrible place to end.
Well, no. So we'll get an EV someday. Sorry.
You know what? I think maybe when we have coffee next week, I actually need to pick you up in my EV and take you for a drive, or let you drive it, and maybe I can convert you.
Okay, that sounds great. So before we wrap up, I'll note we are off next week for the university holiday. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. We'll have Vijay Swarup of ExxonMobil discussing the corporation's energy transition strategy. And finally, please join me in thanking Elaine Buckberg for her presentation today. Thank you, Elaine. That was great.
Thank you.